I was mentioning State Representative Christy Zitto a few minutes ago, and she is viewed by media as being in a particular wing of the Republican Party that media doesn't like. And media, actually, I'm beginning to think a lot of this has been manufactured. They claim that there's a divide between a group of Republicans that she's a member of. If she, they don't have membership cards, but she's good friends with Heather Scott, who is viewed by some in media as being, Cruella DeVille, and Ron Nate from over in the Rexburg area. He's involved in that sort of cluster of constitutionalists, call them that. But the other day, Heather led a charge on the House floor, and the majority went along with her to kill a bill off. So it's you know there may be more agreement among these Republicans than media and Democrats, and I know that might be redundant, that they're trying to portray. And there might be some personality differences. Sure, that happens no matter what room you go into. There are people I work with. I mean, we have about 20 people in the building here every day. You don't always get along. There's going to be just, it's like putting anybody. When I played football in high school, I can remember there were guys on the team I didn't especially like, but we went out and worked together every day on the practice field and in games. And you had to. We had a common goal. And so I think that sometimes this so-called distance between members of the Republican Party in Boise might be a little exaggerated. And I think that in Christie's case, she's a newcomer. A lot of the reaction she gets from fellow legislators is, "You haven't been here very long, and take a little bit more time to learn the ropes and then propose legislation." I think she feels sometimes that she gets treated like a rookie, um, and that happens in everything you do. I remember getting hired at a radio station in 1989, and it was considered at the time one of the five best news talk stations in the country. They had a story on the wall from the trade magazines about it when I went in first time. I looked at the bulletin board. And the way those guys treated me when I first got there, oh, you know, I was getting ready to quit a couple of times. I mean, I just thought, it was like, you're not welcome. And then they hired another guy a few months after I got hired, and all of a sudden, they didn't treat me that way anymore. They treated him that way. So, being the newcomer, you sometimes you experience that. But I think some of the bills that are being proposed by some of the this so-called constitutionalist wing aren't always bad ideas. I referenced Ron Nate earlier. There's a story today from Idaho News Service. It says, in fact, this came from the Rexburg Standard Journal, which is his hometown paper. Nate legislation would repeal Idaho core standards. State Representative Ron Nate has submitted legislation to repeal the Idaho core standards for K through 12 schools. Now, I don't know anybody who's terribly happy with Common Core. My sister, Common Core turned her from a Democrat into a Republican. She's a school teacher. In the year 2000, if you went to my hometown, I've joked before, in my hometown, in the northern reaches of Appalachia, the Democrats, if they had a caucus, they could have done it likely in an old-fashioned phone booth. They didn't need the room. There were so few of them. And my sister happened to be one of them way back in 2000, and there was a Hillary Clinton sign at her house when Mrs. Clinton was first running for U.S. Senate. My sister would not vote for Hillary Clinton this past year. My sister was firmly on the Trump bandwagon. Um, it happened because a few years ago, she's a school teacher, and people forced Common Core at them. And in the beginning, she was like, all right, I'll go along with it. Over time, it so soured her on the Democrat Party in her state that she walked away from the Democrats. In other words, the old line from Ronald Reagan, I didn't, leave the Democratic Party. The Democrats left me. And that's essentially what's happened, I think. But I know Democrats, people who are still registered Democrats, they don't like Common Core. Republicans don't like Common Core. Ron Nate doesn't like Common Core, and even though we're told some of his fellow Republicans don't like Ron Nate, I think there's general agreement Common Core can go. We'll turn all of this back over to the states and let the states make the decisions. I keep reading, well, we need a set of federal standards. Again, who are you in Washington or Massachusetts or Georgia or Omaha, Nebraska to tell us in Idaho what standards we should have? We may have a slightly different culture here. We may have, And I mentioned earlier, Nate is also, he's suggesting that schools be allowed as an elective to teach firearm safety. Why not? I, there's a joke I was told by Keith Thompson one time from Idaho State Police. He said to me, he said, I just assume everybody I meet in Idaho is carrying. Yeah. So therefore, why not show young people how clean a weapon? I don't want to say weapon. It's not a weapon if you never use it. It's it's a peacekeeper. It's there. It's for your own safety. It's a firearm. But if we taught them from the ground up, how just safety, we could expand it into hunting safety. We could expand it into self-defense and all of these things. But just the whole notion. This is a state now where we don't have a permit for concealed carry after the age of 21. The younger folks still have to get that permit, obviously, for 3 years. But I'm telling you, this is not a bad idea. But you wouldn't necessarily teach the same course in New York City. I understand that, which is why local control over education, that used to be the norm. 20 minutes now from 10 o'clock. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. A couple of other state notes, perhaps, in the next segment of the show. I have an example of unbridled liberalism running away. It's in a liberal state. Well, it's a purple state. It's trending more Republican lately, although its dominant metropolitan area is so large, they're likely going to have Democrats in control of some of the levers of power for a long time. Minnesota. I've been there to visit. I didn't go there in winter. I went there around Labor Day, and the daytime highs were still around 75 to 80 degrees in early September. It was quite nice. Even in the evening, we could walk around outside with nothing on but sport coats. I was at a convention, got to meet Jesse Ventura and talk to him for a few minutes, which was an interesting experience. I was sharing the story with him that my dad had been a pro wrestler in Cleveland, Ohio. And then the Army came along, and my dad never wrestled again. And Ventura, who was in the Navy, says, yeah, the Army will do that to you. Bit of a rivalry there, I suppose. Minnesota as they say, is a beautiful place. The land of 10,000 lakes, it's called, but they actually have in excess of 12,000. And I think they have atop that. Well, if you've got 12,000 lakes, then you've got about 12 billion mosquitoes. Didn't have to deal with many of those when we were in downtown Minneapolis conventioning. So, they don't have that much water in the downtown area. But it is a very liberal city. And that's where the big University of Minnesota, is located. And the beautiful colors the team has up. Well, it's similar to what the Vikings wear as well. It's a different shade of purple. But the Golden Gophers, the big football team there, and they have overall they had an improving football program until their politically incorrect coach crossed the campus liberals and got fired this past year, even though they finished at like 7-4 and are getting better and better and better. He wouldn't play along with the liberal gang in control. This story comes from the Media Research Center. University of Minnesota is replacing the titles of Homecoming King and Queen with the gender-neutral, all-inclusive Royals. I thought they played in Kansas City. As part of an effort toward gender inclusivity for trans and gender non-conforming students. A statement on the University of Minnesota. I wonder, if you're a straight guy and you get elected one of the Royals, and then some other guy comes along and he gets elected, and do you have to kiss him at homecoming? A statement on the University of Minnesota 2017 homecoming page claims the move is in the spirit of inclusion. I mean, maybe you could just have two queens. So students with any combination of gender identity can win the homecoming titles. According to the Minnesota Daily, the change is to make homecoming, quote, more inclusive for those who don't conform to traditional gender identities, unquote. How would I just call them the its? Yeah, we've elected a couple of its. Marissa Suter, the interim director of programs and activities at the University of Minnesota, told the Minnesota Daily, quote, this was a good chance for us to make it more inclusive so that hopefully anyone is more willing to participate regardless of their gender identity, unquote. When I was in college, the one thing that I remember, I didn't meet a lot of confused people. No, I had a couple of friends, and I don't know, it just never was really talked about much. They were not straight, but they were nice guys. But they were like everybody else on campus. They were just looking for cheap beer. Um, and I could also remember nobody. Once people figured out what they were, well, your hormones are raging a lot at that age. Um, let's just say that once people actually figured it out, they didn't have much confusion afterwards. David Graff, a member of the Homecoming Planning Board, told WCCO that as a result of the change, instead of homecoming court consisting of 5 men and 5 women, it can now be 10 boys, 10 girls, 10 non binary students, or 10 transgender students. The students who are named Royals will be awarded a scholarship. So I guess that's why people compete for the title. Um, I, do they go there to learn anything anymore, or is it just about making sure that we respect what other people think they are, so that when you go into the working world, sure you may not be able to actually function in the job that and meet the job description, but if you meet an HR director who isn't sure what he or she is, you will then therefore be much more able to respect them during the course of your job interview. And if you show them deference because they don't know who they are, you may well likely get the job, even though you're incompetent when it comes to your ability to count and subtract and do all of those things that might be necessary in the job. 946 now. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. You can reach our program today by dialing us at 736-0300. That's 736. Well, this is a binary program today because we started this program on a remote unit in the other end of the building and then migrated down here to the studio. So, but it's not binary in the same sort of way. No, no. You see, binary was always something I thought you learned in like a math class, physics maybe, in science or math. Binary has a totally different meaning today. I'm still though. Here's the thing: if there's so many of these people, how come when you're at an event, you're walking around, you're meeting people like at a dinner or you're at a gathering after church or I don't know, you just meet people on the street. I've never met anybody who actually said, I'm binary. You know, first of all, I don't know that. How do you explain that? What does that mean? Um, it just maybe it's from some sort of Star Trek episode. You know, uh, there was a group of aliens called Binars on that program. Well, in the original Star Trek, it was all about straight people. Captain Kirk. They may have been aliens, but he was always after the female aliens. And I mean, that was the storyline every week. There was always a new alien female, a woman, that he could fall in love with. And he seemed to do it quite easily. He was like the James Bond of outer space. By the time we got to Star Trek The Next Generation, it was all this touchy-feely stuff. And so there were binars, and we need to better There was an episode where they were discovering that the warp drives that they were using were destroying space, and that they had to slow down, and they could no longer go as fast as they used to and explore space. So all warp travel was then banned by the Federation. But here's the thing: I don't think that the Cardassians, and no, not the ones you see on TV today, but I don't think the Cardassians and the Romulans were paying any attention to that because they were sort of like the Chinese. And even though you've got liberals in the United States, this is what it was. It was supposed to be akin to global warming. They were warping space and they were destroying space while they were doing it. I don't know how that would happen, but that was the notion of the show. So it was a veiled effort to try to tell us we need to stop driving automobiles and we need to close all of our factories. And if we starve, so be it. That way we can protect Mother Earth and allow the Chinese, who will not be closing all of their factories and who will still be burning coal and any other fuel they get, to take the world over. Star Trek didn't last that long. The Next Generation was off the air within a couple of years after that episode. If perhaps by now, in that timeline, if it were still on the air, the universe would have been taken over by the bad guys who would not have stopped traveling with warp drive. But the show changed because a new generation of writers came along, and instead of being about action and adventure and seeing what was out there, to boldly go where no man has gone before. And of course, in the later shows, that was also stricken as well because it says man. See, we need to boldly go where the Binars go. or no binar has gone before, or no lesbian has gone before, or no LGBT has gone before, where no, spiny reptilian alien has gone before. We had to make sure it was more inclusive in that sense. Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. 10 minutes away now from 10 o'clock this morning, and we're at, 31. So we'll melt off some of that snow and ice today. We have a caller with us. Caller, you're up next. You're on the air.
The thing about these universities that the Democrats just don't seem to understand is they're pandering to less than 1% of the population. That's why they're starting to lose all their positions. The Republicans hold more seats nationwide than ever before.
Yeah, even the local Democrat Party hasn't figured that out. The new chairman of and I guess he'd be a chairperson as a Democrat. He hasn't figured it out, or chair being. He wrote a column last week ripping some of the bills that were proposed by Republicans in the Idaho legislature. But what he fails to understand is a lot of these bills deal with making people's lives more convenient, less inconvenience in your life. And that appeals to people. And he wants to sit there and say, oh, well, we need to have an Idaho health care plan that will bankrupt the state. I don't hear a lot of people clamoring for an Idaho health care plan, to be honest with you.
Yeah, me either.
They do, on the other hand. They're a little annoyed when you're driving down the back road and you can't pass somebody who's driving 15 miles under the speed limit. And that appeals to people because it deals with their daily lives. Well, 84.5% of all electoral offices in the state of Idaho, at the local level, county level, and at the state level, are now held by Republicans. And that number continues to grow. John Rushy, who was a fairly conservative Democrat, he got knocked out of government. He was the minority leader, and he's also the legislature. He got defeated by a conservative Republican this past year, just because he was tainted by his association with the party of feel good. Oh, if we only would do this, we'd stop hurting people's feelings, and then we could all feel better. And then that's government's purpose, is to make sure that we all get up every morning and feel respected. Ugh. I had a boss. I mentioned that job where I got the job back in 1989, and I was sometimes treated poorly by my coworkers, especially by the boss. I thought my first name was GD, because he'd come out of the office, GD Colley, and I'm abbreviating that. You can figure out what he was actually saying. When he'd be angry, that's how he would talk to me. And I didn't stand there and say, oh, but they told me back in college that when I got a job that you had to respect me. I had to earn the respect of those people. I had to be able to write fast, write accurately, and get the stories done, get the job done, and get it done. And it was not fun. It was baptism by fire, but I learned it. Luckily, I'll put it this way. I had not been raised in a family where where people said, and we're all going to get along and respect each other at the dinner table. I'd say something at the dinner table about politics, for instance. And my dad would say, why do you believe that? I'd have to explain myself. And my mother, if she wanted me, she was angry at me about something, she called me GD too. So I didn't have any issues when I went into the workplace, and that's what people were talking to me like. And, speaking of this, Mike Rowe made an appearance last night. You know him. He's a spokesman for, I think, Ford, and he does a lot of these programs, Dirty Jobs and the like, on TV. And Mike Rowe is not a flaming liberal in the entertainment industry. He was speaking last night with Tucker Carlson on the Fox News channel and suggested we need better training for our young people, but also better jobs.
There's a belief and a narrative in the country that says we can cure unemployment by creating more opportunity.
Right.
And obviously there's some truth to it, but the skills gap has nothing to do with unemployment, not really. The skills gap proves that opportunity alone isn't enough to get people unemployed.
Right.
Right? And really neither is training. You can have all the opportunity and all the training in the world, but if you don't have an underlying appreciation for the work, if you're not talking about jobs that people affirmatively aspire to, you're going to be pushing the boulder up the hill or tilting at the windmill or whatever self-defeating metaphor makes the most sense to you. It's a sucker's bet. You have to be talking about jobs that are uniformly cared about in order to move the needle.
So you can have a job available, but if no one can do it, the job remains unfilled.
5.6 million jobs exist right now as we're talking. 5.6 million jobs, 75% of which don't require a four-year degree. When people talk about, why the skills gap exists, it's almost, how can it not exist? We took Votech out of high school. At the same time, we told an entire generation that their best hope for success was a four-year degree.
Right.
So the most expensive path becomes the best path for the most people. At the same time, all these other jobs, which are linked to this very fundamental form of education, are completely marginalized.
Now, when you go to that interview for that new welding job, the first thing you need to do is tell them, I want to be called a royal because I'm not sure this morning if I'm a man or a woman or a puppy dog. And here's the hours I need off for my own time when I want to go to a concert. And I want all Fridays off too as well, so I can go hang out with my buddies and guzzle beer just like we did at college. You're not going to get that job. Let me just make that clear. I have a friend, I was deeply in love with her back in my college days. I still talk to her now and then. Times change and the like, but I was pretty close to her. And then she ended up going off and marrying somebody else and had kids and the like. But she was telling me the other day, sharing with me that one of her youngest child is still at home. He's been out of high school a couple of years. However, he knows how to operate heavy equipment. He was trained in that. They just happen to live in a deeply blue city in a deeply blue state. So there aren't a lot of decent jobs for anybody because the liberals have run all the business off. And I told her, I said, I get these emails from various cities around the state of Idaho. I think twice in the last couple of weeks, the city of Pocatello has been advertising that they need heavy equipment operators. I said, somebody like your son would be perfect for that job. He doesn't smoke or drink. He's a straight-laced kid. They'd love to hire somebody like that. He's got no history of any problems with the law. He's kept his nose clean. I said, he might not make a fortune in the beginning, but here's a couple of things to keep in mind. Despite what the liberals believe in all of their surveys about best states to live, the cost of living is really cheap in Idaho compared to, let's say, where you live. And I told her, I said, he could come out here, he could land a job like that, and within 30 years, he's retiring from that job with a decent pension, good benefits. He's got all of that. He may not get rich, but he will always have work, especially after this winter because they need to rebuild all the streets and roads around the state. You're going to have a lot of work behind the levers of that heavy equipment. And that's the thing people have to recognize. You don't necessarily need to have that degree in English literature to fill most of these jobs. And you don't have to have somebody holding your hand and saying, oh, if it hurts your feelings to be called king or queen, we'll call you royal. And nobody will call you footman or a plebeian. No, it won't happen. We won't allow any of those. In fact, even over there in the course about Roman history, we're going to change it. So we'll no longer say patrician because we know that patricians hurt your feelings because they have big estates and lots of money. Yeah. And here at the College of Karl Marx, we're going to ensure in the future there are no more patricians. We're going to have you all go out, burn some buildings down, and then when we take control, we're going to kill all the patricians off. We don't own any guns, but we're going to do it. God willing, if the creek don't rise, they'll allow me to come back and do this all over again tomorrow morning between 8 and 10 o'clock. Rush Limbaugh's coming up next following Fox News right here on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and NewsRadio1310.com.